Let's talk about a global black market, but not just any market. I want you to think about one that doesn't just make money, but actually acts as a kind of multiplier, a tool that makes countless other criminal enterprises possible all over the world.
So, what do you think it is? What's the world's third largest criminal market? It's not drugs, and it's not human trafficking. Though, funnily enough, it's the very thing that fuels both of them. Any ideas? The answer? Well, it's probably not what you're thinking. It's the illegal arms trade. And like I said, it's what experts call a criminal multiplier. It's the essential tool that empowers so many other illicit activities, from local street crime all the way up to full-blown civil wars. And to really get our heads around how this shadow economy works, we first have to understand just how many weapons are already out there.
Right, so let's try to get a sense of the scale we're actually talking about here. Just how many guns are there on this planet?
Well, according to a really big study back in 2017 by the Small Arms Survey, there are at least 1 billion firearms in the world. That's 1 billion. It works out to about 1 gun for every 8 people on Earth. But the real question is, who owns them all?
And this is where the numbers get really surprising. I mean, you'd think that national armies would have most of the weapons, right? But nope, they only account for about 13% of that massive total. The vast majority, a pretty staggering 85%, are in the hands of regular civilians. And that one fact, that's absolutely crucial for understanding how this whole illegal trade gets started.
Okay, so we've got all these weapons floating around. But to really understand the illegal trade, we first got to look at its legitimate counterpart, the legal one. It's so important to see these as two totally separate, but also dangerously interconnected systems.
So, on one hand, you have the legal market. This is the world of government contracts, tons of regulations, and endless paperwork. It's supposed to be transparent, at least in theory. But on the other hand, you have its shadow twin, the illegal market, and that one operates completely outside of any laws or treaties. It's a world of back-alley deals and totally untraceable shipments. So back in 2021, that legal, regulated market for small arms was worth just over $25 billion. Now, that sounds like a massive number, and it is, but it's really important to put that number into perspective.
And this chart just says it all, doesn't it? There's this common idea that the arms trade is this giant engine that drives the entire global economy. But, well, the numbers tell a very different story. The global soy market is almost 5 times bigger, and the market for iPhones, more than 7 times bigger. So the key takeaway here is, while it's significant, the legal arms trade isn't the economic monster some people make it out to be.
So that brings us to the real heart of the issue. If a gun starts its life in that regulated legal system, how in the world does it end up in the hands of a criminal or a terrorist? How does it cross that line?
There are basically 2 main ways this happens. The first, and by far the most common, is something called diversion. This is when a legally made and sold weapon gets stolen or lost or, and this is the big one, illegally resold onto the black market. The second way is clandestine manufacturing, which is just what it sounds like. Weapons being built illegally from the ground up in hidden workshops.
Diversion is really the system's biggest weakness. Just imagine this. A government legally buys a huge shipment of rifles for its army. But then, a corrupt official sells a bunch of them on the side. Or maybe the whole government just collapses, and suddenly those state-owned weapons flood the black market. We saw this exact thing happen in Libya after Gaddafi fell. Arsenals that were meant for the state army ended up arming all sorts of groups across the entire region.
Okay, so once a weapon goes rogue, how does it actually get from point A to point B? Well, it enters what you could call the shadow supply chain, a global underground network that traffickers use to move their goods.
So the number one method by a huge margin is trafficking by land. A whopping 75% of all illegal arms seizures happen on the ground. We're talking about weapons hidden in cars, buses, and trucks, just driving across borders that are really hard to police. It's pretty low-tech, which ironically makes it incredibly hard to stop and surprisingly effective.
Coming in at number 2 is a route that's surprisingly modern, the good old postal service. This accounts for about 10% of seizures, and it often involves weapons that were bought online, usually on the dark web. They're just taken apart, packed into a plain old box, and shipped right through the mail.
And in third place, we've got trafficking by air. Now, this one's riskier for the traffickers, but it's used for really high-value shipments. A classic example happened in 2017, when authorities at the airport in Rio de Janeiro found 60 assault rifles hidden inside a shipment of pool heaters that had just flown in from Miami.
Now, if there is one weapon that is the perfect symbol for this entire illegal ecosystem, it has to be the Kalashnikov. You probably know it as the AK-47. It is, without a doubt, the most popular and instantly recognizable firearm on the planet.
So why this rifle? What makes it so special? Well, its success really boils down to four things. It's cheap. It's famously durable. I mean, this thing works in sand, in mud, you name it. It's incredibly simple to use and to fix. And it was produced on a massive scale, not just in the Soviet Union, but in its allied countries too. And the result of all that? There are over 100 million of them scattered across the globe today.
Its journey is, well, a pretty dark one. The rifle was designed to be a tool for state power, right? It was meant for the armies of authoritarian governments. But because of those unique features, it morphed into something else entirely. A global icon for insurgents, for criminals, and for terrorists.
So we've looked at the scale, the mechanics, the logistics, but what's the real-world cost? What's the ultimate impact of this global shadow trade?
The ripple effects are just devastating. These illegal weapons are the essential tool that makes other huge crimes, like drug and human trafficking, possible. They can pour gasoline on a small local conflict and turn it into a full-scale war. They empower terrorist groups, and they make it incredibly difficult for societies to rebuild after a war ends. We're still seeing that in Libya, where everyone is still armed, and nobody trusts anyone enough to be the first to disarm.
So what's being done about all this? Well, the international community has tried to respond with things like the Arms Trade Treaty, or the ATT. The basic idea is to regulate the legal trade much more strictly, to try and stop those weapons from getting diverted into the illegal market in the first place. But you know, with so many countries having so many conflicting interests, actually enforcing these rules is an enormous challenge. And I'll leave you with one final and, frankly, kind of absurd detail in this whole story. The Kalashnikov Group, the original company that makes the AK-47, has recently been trying to rebrand itself. They are actually attempting to market their products, including that infamous rifle, as instruments of peace.
It's a pretty stunningly cynical marketing ploy, and it leaves us with one last, unsettling question to think about. When a weapon's legacy is so completely written in conflict, can its story ever really, truly be rewritten? Thanks for joining me for this one.